Hello, Prof. Dylan. The topic I'm going to present today is the paradox of China-India relationship. When the Silk Road was still the main trade route, Indians and Chinese had very close cultural and economic ties with each other. However, in recent times, China and India have been characterized by their border disputes and tensions in the fight to become the number one influencer of Asia. Despite their differences, trade between both countries is still on the rise. It fascinates me how two countries can be at a deadlock with each other on one issue, but also close business partners with similar goals on another. Hence, I decided to dig deeper into this topic. These are the four main areas I want to cover today, namely the cause of conflict, analyzing India and China's views through IR lenses, and the Western influence. Firstly, onto the deep-rooted cause for conflict. The main cause of dispute was the contested areas near the borders, namely the line of extra control and the McMahon line. The McMahon line is proposed by the British in a series of notes exchanged between British India, Tibet, and China in 1914. These notes, known as the Simla Accord, was intended to define the boundary between Tibet and British India. While Tibet accepted the McMahon line, China did not. On the other hand, the line of actual control was established after the 1962 crossfire between India and China. However, to this day, both sides still have differing opinions over who controls what. The disputed borders are located deep in the Himalaya mountains, which have harsh living conditions. So then we wonder, what do they actually get out of this? From a realist point of view, one may argue that both India and China are realists who don't care about collaboration when their individual interests are at stake. For China, the Aksai Chin region is strategically important as it connects China closer to India's hostile neighbor, Pakistan. If anything were to go south for India and China, China can still exert its influence over neighboring countries without going through India borders. This also makes trading with the Middle East countries easier. As for Taiwan, having control means greater stability for China's Tibet region. Secondly, it could be due to the terrible historical events where China was left friendless during that colonized period. And it wants to regain its sense of humility and never again let its fate be dictated or weakened by another country. This causes it to act in the name of defensive realism. I believe their main intent, however, is not to harm India, for if it really wanted to, it could have been another Middle East war situation. Instead, the fear of loss drives them to have an upper hand when it comes to defending their country's security. Especially when India is not showing favoritism to China, China is insecure about whose side India is really on, theirs or the US. Being arch enemies with the US, any closer bonds between India and the US will leave them on the edge. So the fear of India becoming US new puppet would cause them to act against India. So China takes on a more aggressive and assertive view on border disputes. But if we were to go further than defensive realism, China could also be pulling a US-China tension on India, except that it is acting as the US role this time. Think about it this way. If A is the top student in class and B is the second best, the status quo is that A would not want B to surpass him, and vice versa, B would not be happy being second the whole time. And US is the leading international power, hence in the US-China relations, US would want to repress China's growth, while in China-India's situation, China will want to put India in its place through military advances, as China is currently the greater leader in Asia. This clearly reflects that the hegemonic transition theory exists, and power shifts will always inevitably bring about conflict. All in all, China is definitely maximizing its own interests over the idea of global peace when it constantly engages in the fight of the contested areas. Meanwhile, for India, it is taking on the role of an underdog who tries to challenge the status quo. It has every right to fear the intentions of its powerful neighbor and therefore also pull a defensive realism view by strengthening its side of the military. This is actually an ironic cycle, which shows how the border dispute is a conflict of their own making. India's foreign policy in recent years has been geared more towards countering Beijing than engagement, and as India have strategic ties with the US, China feels threatened, hence they try to exert dominance over India. Then India in turn feels that in order to be on the same bargaining field as China, it needs a stronger power to back them up, hence causing them to be closer to the US. It is a vicious cycle of distrust and doubt, proving how it really is just a dog-eat-dog world. However, liberalism supporters will argue otherwise. Despite the tension and differences, trade between the two countries rose steadily and has grown from 3 billion in 2000 to 125 billion in 2021. Clear to say, India and China are very similar in their needs as a developing country, and there is more to gain from collaboration than war. They are both founding members of BRICS, which is an acronym that represents the five emerging economies: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. It is a platform where countries from the global south come together to address shared challenges and opportunities and to have a stronger voice in international forums, specifically against Eurocentric power plays. We might also argue that it is because of liberalist views that both countries have not broken into full-blown war yet, for economic collaborations does more good than being complete enemies, and they have in fact banned weapons to minimize casualties. And this brings me to my final point: how the West plays a role in this mess, or specifically, how colonization messes up relations between individual colonized countries. As late as 1962, at the height of the India-China border dispute, Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai said that our people's common interest in their struggle against imperialism outweigh by far all the differences between our two countries. We have a major responsibility for Sino-Indian relationship, for Asian-African solidarity, and Asian peace. Indeed, if we go back to look at what was the root cause of their conflict, it was the fact that the then colonized British India thought they had a say on the territory of China and India, even though the British are just the outsiders. It's just depressing how two victims of colonization are pitted against each other by the perpetrator of violence, the colonizer. I feel that neither China nor India should become victims to the ticking bombs left by the British colonial rule, lies fabricated by a departing colonial power. In the book titled Midnight Borders, it was also mentioned that Atchiso's treatise, a collection of British India treaties published in 1930s, reported that a similar convention was of no political or international significance because of China's refusal to sign it. A few years later, however, the same volume was reprinted with a different and altered information, this time portraying the negotiations that led to a similar convention as significant and binding. It shows how falsified truths were believed to be an accepted fact, and this led to a possible distortion of history. This is also where constructivism comes in, because the historic events China and India experience come to shape their modern-day views. China, being once exploited by colonizers, would simply hate to be dictated by a borderline drawn by the British, especially when it does not benefit them. Conversely, India, being influenced by British rule, believes that since the British were the ones who represented India and concluded the line as valid, it should not be contested. This also draws a parallel to incidents such as the Israel-Palestine conflict, which is also caused by Western influence on border drawing. I hate to see that the poorly decided borderlines drawn by the West are causing so much issue in the global South, impeding their already slow developments. Through the paradox of India and China relations, I can't help but identify the similar patterns on how the Western powers leave a mess in the global South, then retreat back to their territory to enjoy their power, while developing countries are unable to build allies with each other to this day, leading to impeded progress. Hence, I want to conclude that effective cooperation between these two Asian giants is crucial, as not only does it benefit their own citizens, it also contributes to global peace, stability, and development. However, achieving such cooperation requires a commitment to diplomacy, mutual respect, and both India and China should try harder to manage and resolve differences as they arise. Thank you.